One of the first things you notice when you begin to read the parables of Jesus is just how many of them center around the life of agriculture. Farmers and seeds, sheep and shepherds, trees and land. Jesus is constantly using the everyday material reality that surrounds the ancient Israelites. He uses these as the illustrations in his teachings. And it is most certainly this image we read today of the shepherd that looms largest in these agrarian metaphors. But Jesus is not alone or the first in his use of this imagery, because ancient Israel was a fundamentally pastoral culture. The shepherd tending to his livestock was absolutely essential to the Israelites' way of life. Where the Egyptians and the Assyrians and the Babylonians could rely on great feats of irrigation, of engineering to irrigate their crops, rather, the Israelites had to rely on the rain, on the gift of the weather from God. And they had to rely on being able to move their herds to wherever the green pastures happened to lie. And so this image of the shepherd ends up being found throughout the Bible. For example, the prophets regularly refer to God as the great shepherd. While blessing his sons, Jacob in Genesis says, "The God before whom my ancestors, Abraham and Isaac, walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day." Likewise, Isaiah says, "Like a shepherd, he feeds his flock. In his arms, he gathers the lambs." And then, of course, as we read today in Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not be in want." And the more we think about this shepherd idea, the more it becomes a perfectly natural connection to make. After all, if you talk to anyone who tends to sheep, one of the first things they will tell you is that sheep do not naturally herd together very well. They seem to be perfectly happy to just wander off, getting themselves lost or in even greater trouble. And if you look over the themes of the Bible or spend even a moment to reflect on your own spiritual journey, that tendency to wander off might sound familiar. How often do we hear about the Israelites wandering away from their God and finding themselves in all kinds of trouble? How often do we find ourselves plowing ahead with our own plans and schemes only to look up and realize we have no idea where we are or how we got there? You see, when we really start to dig into this image of the shepherd, we find more than just a romantic, pastoral view of God's tender love for us, although there is that. But the truth is, sometimes this image of the shepherd also reveals some unflattering tendencies that we seem to share with sheep. But there is more here in this image than just this reflection on our own tendencies. Because beyond getting lost, we also need to consider that sheep are an animal with plenty of predators prowling around, ready to pounce at just the right moment. That was certainly the experience of the Israelites. Wandering away from the safety of their shepherd, they would inevitably walk right into the hands of their enemies, those nations who surrounded them: Egypt, Babylon, Assyria, nations ready and eager to devour. Of course, Peter also warns us in his epistle that our adversary, the devil, prowls around like a lion, looking for a wandering sheep to catch. But here again is the image of the shepherd, ever vigilant, guarding against all these enemies. All the sheep have to do is rely on their shepherd for protection, and they're safe. All we have to do is rely on ours. So the shepherd keeps the sheep together and protects them. But that's not the only two roles that the shepherd fills. For as Psalm 23 puts it, the shepherd is the one who knows where the good grass is and the clean water. And the shepherd leads his sheep to them for their nourishment and their refreshment. And are we not here because of the one who has led us to the refreshing water of baptism, the one who spiritually nourishes us in the Eucharist? Here again, we have the shepherd who leads us to these things. So gathering the flock, protecting it, and leading it to nourishment, these were all the responsibilities of the shepherd. And the Israelites were very familiar with this role. So it's really no surprise that throughout the Old Testament, the prophets constantly urged the Israelites to cling to God as their shepherd, as the one who would bring them together, keep them safe, and always take care of them. But there is one more connection here that I think is worth pointing out. For it's not only God and the prophets who are seen through this image of the shepherd in the Bible. After all, who is God's chosen king? It's none other than a shepherd boy named David. David, who's called from the fields by Samuel to be given the task of shepherding the people of Israel on God's behalf. Here we have the king gathering them together, protecting them, and looking after them. For Israel, kings are meant to be shepherds too. And so for Jesus here to be describing himself as a shepherd, as the good shepherd, is to make a very particular claim with much deeper connotations than just the sort of idyllic, romanticized images of, gentle shepherds in the countryside with their little lambs on their shoulders. Because what Jesus is doing here is making a direct connection between himself and King David. He is announcing his role as the Messiah, the great shepherd coming like David to scatter their enemies, to gather them up into safety, and to lead them back to those promised green pastures. But this claim by Jesus also goes beyond merely a royal claim of Davidic lineage, because Jesus claims to be the good shepherd. And Jesus tells the disciples that the good shepherd doesn't just look after his sheep, but actually lays down his life for them. This image of the shepherd goes far beyond even the care of a great king like David. For this shepherd has come to give up everything in pursuit of his lost sheep, endure anything to snatch his sheep out of the jaws of their enemies, and go anywhere, even hell itself, to lead them back to green pastures. The good shepherd is not merely a king, but is the very God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And we know this by the love that he has shown us. As John puts it, we know love by this, that he laid down his life for us. This is who our good shepherd is.